The shrill, piercing sound of a siren cut through the otherwise perfect silence of the mountain air, shattering the peace around Alex's beloved cabin. He looked up from the wooden chair on his porch, a slight frown creasing his brow. Sirens? Way up here? It was almost unheard of. Then he saw her, striding up the gravel path, a triumphant, almost gleeful smirk plastered across her face. Deborah. Her floral sundress, usually reserved for manicured suburban lawns, seemed utterly out of place against the rugged backdrop of pines and granite. Behind her, a police cruiser, its blue and red lights flashing silently, pulled to a stop near his gate, kicking up a small cloud of dust. Two officers, looking a little bewildered themselves, stepped out. "There he is, officer!" Deborah shrieked, pointing a perfectly manicured finger directly at Alex. "That's the man." And that, she gestured wildly at his cozy log cabin, the cabin he'd poured his heart and soul into, the cabin that had been his sanctuary for years, is the egregious violation. Alex pushed himself out of the chair, his movements slow and deliberate, a calm defiance in his posture. He hadn't broken any laws, hadn't caused any trouble. All he wanted was peace and quiet. He knew exactly what this was about, another escalation in Deborah's relentless campaign to bring order to his slice of paradise. But this? Calling the cops? This was a new low, even for her. "Ms. Albright," Alex said, his voice steady despite the sudden rush of adrenaline, "what exactly is the issue here?" He turned to the officers, offering a polite nod. "Officers, is there something I can help you with?" One of the officers, a burly man with a kind face named Officer Miller, stepped forward, a notepad in his hand. "Mr. Peterson," he consulted his notes. "We received a complaint regarding multiple HOA violations on your property. Specifically, unapproved exterior alterations, excessive noise, and failure to maintain aesthetic standards." He looked around at the pristine, rustic cabin, surrounded by towering trees and wild flora, then back at Deborah, who was practically vibrating with self-righteousness. "Looks pretty quiet and well-maintained to me, ma'am." "It is not." Deborah screeched, her voice echoing slightly in the crisp mountain air. "He put up a new fence, officer. Without approval. And that shed, it's an eyesore. And don't even get me started on his gardening." She waved her hand dismissively at Alex's small, vibrant patch of wildflowers and herbs. "It's just weeds." Alex took a deep breath, fighting the urge to sigh. He knew this was going to be a long afternoon. He looked at Officer Miller, then back at Deborah, a tiny, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "Well, Deborah," he said, his voice calm, "I suppose if you're going to involve the authorities in a property dispute, we should get all the facts straight. Officers, perhaps we should discuss the exact boundaries of this HOA's jurisdiction? Because, you see," Alex paused, letting his gaze sweep across the vast expanse of forest, across the winding river valley below, and up to the majestic peaks that stretched into the horizon, peaks that seemed to touch the very clouds. "I'm fairly certain the homeowners association has no authority up here. Not on my cabin, and certainly not on this entire mountain." The officers exchanged a confused glance. Deborah's jaw dropped, her triumphant smirk replaced by a look of utter bewilderment, quickly morphing into disbelief and then pure rage. What could Alex possibly mean? How could he own the entire mountain? The air suddenly felt thick with unspoken questions. The serene mountain setting, moments ago tranquil, was now charged with an incredible, almost unbelievable tension. What secret was Alex hiding, and how would this confrontation truly unfold? Alex Peterson had always felt a deep, almost spiritual connection to the wild, untamed places of the world. Growing up in a busy city, he often found himself lost in books about explorers, adventurers, and hermits living off the land. His childhood bedroom, instead of posters of pop stars, was adorned with maps of national parks and hand-drawn sketches of mountain ranges. While other kids dreamt of becoming astronauts or movie stars, Alex yearned for the scent of pine needles, the whisper of the wind through ancient trees, and the vast, silent majesty of a starlit sky unobscured by city lights. As he grew older, this longing only intensified. He pursued a career that allowed him to work remotely, in software development, a field that offered both intellectual challenge and the precious gift of location independence. He saved every penny, not for fancy cars or lavish vacations, but for a dream that had simmered in his heart since he was a small boy, a place of his own, far from the clamor of civilization, a sanctuary where he could truly breathe. His search for this perfect retreat was long and arduous. He scoured online listings, talked to real estate agents specializing in rural properties, and drove thousands of miles across different states, always searching for that elusive combination of isolation, natural beauty, and a sense of belonging that wasn't tied to a bustling community. Many places were too close to towns, others too rugged, some simply lacked that special something that resonated with his soul. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, he stumbled upon it. An old, faded listing for a rustic mountain retreat with acreage. The photos were grainy, the description sparse, almost as if the seller didn't want too many people to know about it. It spoke of a small, hand-built cabin nestled deep within the Pine Ridge Mountains, accessible by a winding gravel road. The property seemed vast, stretching beyond what the single photo could capture. His heart pounded with a quiet excitement he hadn't felt in years. The drive to see it was an adventure in itself. The paved road eventually gave way to a rough, unpaved track, barely wide enough for one car. It twisted and turned, climbing steadily higher, leaving behind the last vestiges of cell service and any signs of human habitation. Trees, tall and ancient, formed a dense canopy overhead, dappling the road with patches of sunlight. The air grew colder, cleaner, and carried the rich scent of damp earth and pine. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the track opened into a small clearing, and there it was. Not a grand lodge, but a humble, perfectly proportioned log cabin, weathered gray by years of sun and snow, nestled at the edge of a vast, whispering forest. A stone chimney stood proudly, hinting at cozy fires within. A clear, babbling stream flowed nearby, its gentle murmur the only sound besides the rustling leaves. It was exactly as he had dreamt, even better. It felt less like a house and more like an organic part of the landscape, belonging there as much as the trees and rocks. The owner, an elderly gentleman named Mr. Henderson, was waiting for him. Mr. Henderson was a man forged by the mountains, lean, with a kind, crinkled face and eyes that held the wisdom of countless sunrises and sunsets. He spoke softly, telling Alex stories of the cabin, how he and his late wife had built it log by log, how they had lived off the land, growing their own food, fishing in the stream, and finding joy in the simple rhythms of nature. This place, Mr. Henderson said, his voice raspy with age and emotion, it needs someone who understands it. Someone who respects it. It ain't just wood and stone, son. It's a living thing. Alex listened, captivated. He didn't just see a property. He saw a legacy, a responsibility. He saw a chance to live authentically, to connect with the earth in a way modern life rarely allowed. He asked about the property lines, and Mr. Henderson simply gestured vaguely towards the distant ridges. Go as far as you can see, son, he chuckled. Most of this land out here, it was always ours. My grandpappy got it after the war, piece by piece. Never cared much for maps and deeds, just the land itself. We just kept adding to it, never really selling much off. The paperwork, when it finally came, was indeed complicated. It turned out Mr. Henderson owned a truly remarkable amount of land, not just the few acres around the cabin, but a significant portion of the mountain itself. The previous generations had been astute, albeit unconventional, landholders, slowly acquiring parcels over decades, sometimes trading services for deeds, sometimes simply living there for so long no one disputed their claim. Alex ended up purchasing not just the cabin, but a sprawling, multi-thousand-acre tract that included several peaks, a pristine valley, and miles of untouched forest. It was an incredible stroke of luck, or perhaps, destiny. He officially became the owner of a significant part of the Pine Ridge mountain range. He smiled, thinking of the entire mountain aspect of the current situation. He wasn't exaggerating. Life at the cabin was everything Alex had hoped for. He spent his days coding, his nights under a blanket of stars so bright they seemed to hum. He learned to identify local flora and fauna, to track deer, to fish for trout in the rushing stream. He cultivated a small, biodiverse garden, not for profit, but for the sheer joy of growing his own food, a living testament to his connection with the land. He didn't just take, he gave back. He organized small, informal cleanup days on the public trails nearby, inviting locals from the quaint little town of Oakhaven, nestled at the base of the mountain. He helped old Mrs. Gable fix her leaky roof after a bad storm, refusing payment, simply because it was the right thing to do. He shared his bountiful harvests with struggling families, leaving baskets of fresh vegetables on their doorsteps, a quiet act of kindness. His reputation in Oakhaven quickly grew, not as the reclusive mountain man, but as a kind, thoughtful, and generous neighbor. The town of Oakhaven was small, a place where everyone knew everyone, and life moved at a slower, more deliberate pace. Alex found a genuine sense of community there, even though he lived high above it. He frequented the local diner, the Rusty Spoon, where he'd often share stories with David, the owner, about life on the mountain. He'd trade jokes with Sarah, the librarian, who always had a new book recommendation for him. His encounters with the Oakhaven residents were always pleasant, filled with the warmth and genuine interest that only small towns can offer. He felt like he belonged, truly belonged, in a way he never had in the city. However, the peace of Oakhaven and the tranquility of his mountain sanctuary began to subtly shift with the arrival of the new Pine Ridge Estates development at the lower slopes of the mountain. A large corporation had bought up a significant tract of land closer to the main highway, carving out lots for luxury homes. With the development came a homeowners association, the Pine Ridge Estates HOA. At first, Alex paid it no mind. His property was miles away, high above their meticulously planned community. He was in the wilderness, they were in a glorified suburb. The two worlds seemed entirely separate. Then, the letters started. Thin, official-looking envelopes with the HOA logo, delivered by a persistent postal worker who apparently knew no bounds. The first few were general notices, about community meetings, about proposed landscaping changes. Alex just tossed them into his recycling bin. He wasn't part of their community. But then, they became more specific. Dear property owner, one began, it has come to our attention that your fencing along the eastern perimeter appears to be in violation of Section 4.3.b of the Pine Ridge Estates Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, CC and RS. All fencing must be uniform in height, material, and color, and must be approved by the Architectural Review Board prior to installation. Alex blinked. His fence was a few roughly hewn logs he'd laid down to mark a path to his spring, a natural, rustic barrier that blended perfectly with the forest. It wasn't a fence in any conventional sense, certainly not one meant to contain a suburban lawn. He laughed, crumpled the letter, and threw it in the fire pit. Another letter followed, this one about unauthorized structures. It referred to his firewood shed, a small, simple structure he'd built out of salvaged wood, designed to protect his winter fuel supply from the elements. It was tucked away behind his cabin, barely visible unless you knew it was there. This was getting ridiculous. The source of these increasingly aggressive notices, he soon learned, was Deborah Albright. She was a recent transplant from a meticulously manicured suburban community back east, someone who apparently believed that rules, regulations, and aesthetic uniformity were the very bedrock of civilization. She had been quickly elected to the HOA board, and it seemed her personal mission was to extend the HOA's reach, bringing order to what she perceived as the wild, unkempt chaos of the mountainside. She saw Alex's cabin, his very way of life, as an affront to her sense of propriety. Their first direct encounter was at the small local hardware store in Oakhaven. Alex was buying nails, Deborah was scrutinizing paint samples, looking utterly out of place in her crisp white blouse and designer sunglasses. She spotted him. "Mr. Peterson, isn't it?" she began, her voice a little too sweet, a little too loud. "Deborah Albright, from the Pine Ridge Estates HOA. We've been trying to reach you." Alex turned, offering a polite but distant smile. "Yes, Ms. Albright. I've received your letters. I'm afraid there must be some confusion. My property isn't part of your HOA." Deborah's smile tightened. "Oh, but it is, Mr. Peterson. The development extends quite far up the mountain. And your rustic aesthetic, it's quite disruptive to the overall harmony we're trying to create." She gestured vaguely with her hand, as if trying to smooth out the very air around them. "That structure you have near your spring, for instance. And the haphazard way you've arranged your firewood. It simply won't do." Alex's eyebrows rose slightly. "Ms. Albright, with all due respect, I own several thousand acres up there. My cabin is not visible from your development. And I assure you, my firewood arrangement has no impact on anyone's harmony down in Pine Ridge Estates." He picked up his nails, ready to leave. "But it sets a precedent, Mr. Peterson," she insisted, blocking his path slightly. "If we allow one person to disregard the rules, then what's next? Chaos? We have standards here, very high standards, and everyone must adhere to them for the good of the community. My community is Oakhaven, Ms. Albright, and the wildlife of the mountain," Alex said gently, but with an underlying firmness. "And they seem perfectly content with my cabin and my firewood. Good day." He paid for his nails and left, leaving a huffing Deborah in his wake. He thought that would be the end of it, a minor skirmish. But Deborah was relentless. More letters arrived, each one escalating the tone. They threatened fines, legal action, even forced removal of his unapproved structures. Alex ignored them. He was confident in his legal standing, his land deeds were clear, his property well outside the Pine Ridge Estate's official boundaries. He felt a pang of pity for her, so consumed by trivial rules, so blind to the vast, wild beauty surrounding her. He even tried to reach out, sending her a small basket of fresh berries he'd picked, with a note wishing her well and hoping for peace. She returned the basket, unopened, with a stern, printed HOA notice attached. The incidents continued. One afternoon, while Alex was chopping wood, he saw Deborah, binoculars in hand, peering at his cabin from a distant ridge accessible by a newly blazed trail that encroached on what he believed was his land. He simply waved, a friendly, if slightly bemused, gesture. She quickly lowered the binoculars and scuttled away. Another time, he found small, official-looking HOA stakes pounded into the ground near his favorite hiking trail, clearly meant to demarcate their supposed property line, but encroaching on his own. He pulled them out and left them neatly stacked on the nearest Pine Ridge Estate signpost. He believed in kindness, in understanding, but he also believed in standing his ground when it came to his home and his peace. The most recent extreme event, the one that directly preceded Deborah calling the police, occurred just last week. Alex had finally decided to replace the old, rickety porch railing on his cabin. It was purely for safety, a simple, rustic railing made from local timber, stained to match the cabin's natural hues. He'd even gone to Oakhaven's small lumberyard for the wood, chatting with the owner, Mr. Jenkins, about the best type for the mountain climate. Mr. Jenkins, who knew Alex well, had just shaken his head when Alex mentioned Deborah. "That woman," he'd said, "she's going to drive herself crazy trying to police the whole mountain." No sooner had Alex finished the railing, stepping back to admire his handiwork, than he heard a car struggling up his private gravel road. It was Deborah's sleek, black SUV. She stopped abruptly, her face a mask of furious determination. She stormed out of the car, slamming the door. "Mr. Peterson," she shrieked, her voice shrill with indignation. "What in heaven's name do you think you are doing?" She pointed a trembling finger at the freshly installed railing. That is an unapproved exterior alteration. It does not conform to the aesthetic guidelines. You have no right to build that without board approval." Alex sighed, rubbing a hand across his jaw. "Ms. Albright, it's a porch railing. It's on my private property, miles from your development. It's for safety. And again, I am not part of your HOA. You are," she screamed, her face turning a blotchy red. "And you are breaking the rules. You are undermining everything we are trying to achieve here. This is an insult. A personal insult." Her voice rose to a crescendo, bordering on hysterical. "I have tried to be reasonable. I have sent you letter after letter. But you, Mr. Peterson, clearly have no respect for order, for civility, for the rule of law. This ends now. I will not stand for this blatant disregard. You will regret this, Mr. Peterson. You will deeply regret this." With that, she spun on her heel, scrambled back into her SUV, and sped off down the winding road, leaving a cloud of dust and the distinct smell of burning rubber in her wake, clearly planning her next, and most drastic, move. And that drastic move had brought the police cruiser to his front gate, shattering the mountain's tranquility. Officer Miller, looking increasingly uncomfortable, cleared his throat. "Mr. Peterson, Ms. Albright here states that your property falls under the Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association bylaws. She presented us with a document that seems to indicate that." He held up a neatly printed paper, likely a copy of the HOA's expansive rules. "She's claiming these structures, like your porch railing and that shed, are violations and she wants them removed." Deborah, having somewhat recovered from Alex's cryptic remark, puffed out her chest. "Exactly, officer. He's in direct defiance. The aesthetic integrity of our community is at stake. We have spent considerable resources establishing these standards, and we expect compliance from all property owners within the designated area." She shot Alex a triumphant glare, as if daring him to argue. Alex remained calm, his gaze unwavering as he looked from Deborah to the officers. "Officer Miller, Officer Jenkins," he addressed the second officer, a younger woman who had remained quiet until now, "I appreciate you responding to this. However, Ms. Albright is mistaken. My property is not, and never has been part of the Pine Ridge Estates HOA. The documents you have, while perhaps legitimate for their specific development, do not apply to my land." Deborah snorted. "Nonsense. We have detailed maps. Your property is clearly within the extended boundaries that were purchased for the development. You just don't want to follow the rules." Officer Miller looked from the paper in his hand to the vast, wild landscape stretching out behind Alex's cabin. He scratched his head. "Well, ma'am, according to this, the HOA boundary stops right at the old logging trail, which is about a mile down the mountain from here. This cabin, Mr. Peterson's cabin, appears to be well beyond that." He gestured vaguely up the winding gravel road that led to Alex's secluded retreat. Deborah's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "That's an old map, officer. It's outdated. The HOA acquired additional acreage. The boundaries were expanded. My property survey clearly shows it." She fumbled in her oversized handbag, pulling out a rolled-up document. She unrolled it with a flourish, almost tearing the corners, and pointed a trembling finger at a section. "See here. This boundary line encompasses his entire parcel. It was a bulk purchase, part of the new development zoning." Alex watched her calmly, a slight, knowing smile playing on his lips. "Deborah, I assure you, your new development zoning does not override existing, long-standing property deeds. My deeds predate your entire development by decades. Generations, in fact. He walked slowly towards a heavy, wooden chest on his porch, its surface weathered but sturdy. He opened it, revealing neatly organized stacks of papers. He pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder. "Officer Miller, Officer Jenkins," Alex said, his voice carrying a quiet authority. "I understand you have a job to do. But before we go any further, I believe it's important to clarify the exact legal ownership and boundaries of this land. My family, through Mr. Henderson, has owned this property for nearly a century. And when I say, this property, I mean something far more extensive than Ms. Albright seems to realize." He carefully opened the folder, revealing an array of documents. Old, parchment-like deeds with elegant, faded script. Newer, official-looking surveys with complex lines and annotations. And most importantly, a very large, detailed plat map, meticulously drawn, showing not just his immediate surroundings, but the sprawling expanse of the Pine Ridge Mountains. His finger traced a bold, red line that encompassed the cabin, the stream, the surrounding valleys, and indeed, a significant portion of the mountain range, including several peaks that dwarfed the Pine Ridge Estates development below. "This is the official survey, updated just last year," Alex explained, his voice even. "It clearly shows my parcel. As you can see, the Pine Ridge Estates development," he pointed to a much smaller, neatly squared-off section at the very base of the mountain, a good few miles away, "is entirely separate. Their HOA has jurisdiction only over their lots. My land, including this cabin, is outside their purview." Officer Miller took the plat map, his brow furrowed in concentration. He compared it to Deborah's hurried survey, then back to the older deeds Alex presented. The difference was stark. Alex's documents were comprehensive, professional, and went back generations. Deborah's map looked like a hurried addition, a hopeful expansion. Officer Jenkins leaned over, studying the maps with a critical eye. A quiet, tense silence hung in the air, broken only by the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. Deborah, seeing the officer's doubt, began to sputter. "That's impossible. This is a scam. He's trying to trick you. Our legal team assured us of the extended boundaries. This can't be right." She glared at Alex, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and something akin to fear. Her carefully constructed world of rules and boundaries seemed to be crumbling before her very eyes. "Ms. Albright," Officer Jenkins said, her voice firm but polite, "these documents Mr. Peterson has presented appear to be legally binding and very thoroughly recorded. This larger parcel clearly predates the Pine Ridge Estates development. Unless you have something equally comprehensive, drawn up by a certified surveyor and recorded with the county, that specifically shows an acquisition of this land by the HOA, then Mr. Peterson's claims seem to hold up." Alex leaned against the porch railing, the one Deborah had so vociferously complained about. He offered a small, polite smile. "Perhaps, Ms. Albright, your legal team misinterpreted the extent of the land available for purchase, or perhaps they simply overlooked existing claims. These mountains have a long history, and land ownership here isn't always as straightforward as a suburban plat." He made sure to highlight the historical depth of his ownership, implicitly suggesting that Deborah's superficial understanding of the area was the real issue. Deborah was speechless, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The officers exchanged another glance, clearly leaning towards Alex's side. The situation had suddenly shifted dramatically. What had started as a triumphant call to enforce rules was rapidly turning into an embarrassing revelation for the HOA queen. The early morning sun began to creep over the highest peaks, casting long, golden shadows across the clearing. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. This serene setting was a stark contrast to the boiling frustration simmering just below Deborah's carefully composed exterior. Her perfectly coiffed hair seemed to droop slightly, and the triumphant glint in her eyes had been replaced by a frantic, darting uncertainty. She had arrived with such confidence, so sure of her authority, ready to dismantle Alex's quiet life with the force of her indignation and the supposed backing of the law. Now, the law was looking at her with skepticism. Officer Miller finally handed the documents back to Alex. "Mr. Peterson, these look very legitimate. It appears your property is indeed outside the HOA's jurisdiction. As such, any complaints regarding your structures or landscaping would not fall under our enforcement for HOA violations." He then turned to Deborah, his tone more formal. "Ms. Albright, without clear evidence that this property is legally part of your HOA's managed area, we cannot take any action here based on your bylaws. This would be a civil matter, if anything, and it would require substantial legal backing on your part to prove your claim against these established deeds." Deborah's face crumpled. She looked from Alex, who stood calmly, radiating an almost irritating tranquility, to the officers, who now seemed to be subtly siding with him. But this is preposterous. The developers assured us. They showed us maps. This entire area was designated for future expansion." Her voice rose in pitch, betraying her escalating panic. "He can't just own the whole mountain. That's insane." Alex chuckled softly, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate with the very essence of the mountain. "Well, Ms. Albright, the whole mountain is a bit of an exaggeration, but I do own a substantial portion of it. Enough, certainly, to ensure that no HOA, however ambitious, can tell me what to do with my cabin or my land." He paused, letting that sink in. He then looked directly at her, his eyes kind but firm. "I understand your desire for order, Deborah. But my way of life, my home, harms no one. And it certainly doesn't impact your community, which is miles away." Deborah seemed to shrink, her earlier bravado completely deflated. The officers, seeing the clear resolution of the situation, at least for their purposes, began to move back towards their cruiser. Officer Jenkins gave Alex a small, appreciative nod. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Peterson. This clears things up." As they reached their vehicle, Deborah finally found her voice again, though it was now laced with a desperate, seething anger. "This isn't over, Mr. Peterson. You think you can defy the Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association? You think you can just ignore our authority? You will learn. We have ways. You will regret this day." She jabbed a finger in the air, her face contorted with fury, before stomping into her SUV and speeding off, gravel flying, leaving the police officers to shake their heads and Alex to stand alone, bathed in the morning sun, his peace momentarily restored. The immediate tension had dissipated, but Alex knew this was only a temporary reprieve. Deborah was not one to back down, especially not after such a public humiliation. He felt a quiet weariness settle over him, despite his victory. He loved his solitary life, but these constant skirmishes were draining. He walked back to his porch, gazing out at the vast expanse of trees and sky that was his, truly his. He had stood his ground, but what would Deborah's ways entail next? He had shown kindness, offered understanding, but it had only fueled her relentless need for control. His mind began to wander to the practicalities of his ownership, the old, almost forgotten boundaries, and a particular, rarely visited part of his property where something unexpected lay hidden, something that might prove to be far more significant than a mere boundary dispute. Suddenly, a distant but distinct sound cut through the air. Not a siren this time, but something mechanical, something heavy. It was the unmistakable groan of machinery, the rhythmic thud of large equipment, coming from deeper within his property, in an area he seldom visited, a place he hadn't thought about in years. It was coming from the direction of the old, disused quarry, long abandoned and largely forgotten. A prickle of unease ran down his spine. No one was supposed to be there. No one. This was private land, deep within his thousands of acres. He had won the battle with Deborah, but now a new, more unsettling presence had made itself known on his tranquil mountain. What was happening in the forgotten quarry, and who dared to trespass on his secluded domain? The distant, grinding rumble of machinery was far more unsettling than Deborah's shrill demands had been. Alex's tranquility, so carefully guarded, now felt truly threatened. He stood frozen for a moment on his porch, listening intently. The sound grew louder, a heavy, mechanical cough followed by a groan and then the metallic screech of metal on rock. It was coming from the direction of the old quarry, a place that had lain dormant for decades. He hadn't thought about it in years. It was just another geological feature on his vast property, a reminder of a bygone era of industry, now reclaimed by nature. But those sounds were new, intrusive, and unmistakable. Someone was there. A knot of unease tightened in Alex's stomach. His thousands of acres meant privacy, isolation, and a deep sense of security. The idea of someone, anyone, trespassing and operating heavy machinery on his land without permission was an affront to his most fundamental understanding of his home. It wasn't just a physical boundary being crossed, it was a violation of the quiet sanctity he had cultivated. He thought back to Mr. Henderson's words, "This place, it needs someone who understands it. Someone who respects it." This noise, this intrusion, was the very opposite of respect. He quickly changed from his comfortable cabin clothes into sturdier hiking boots and a durable jacket. He grabbed a small backpack, stuffing in a water bottle, a first aid kit, and his phone, though he knew cell service was spotty, if not non-existent, in that part of his property. A wave of adrenaline, sharper and colder than the frustration Deborah had caused, surged through him. He was no stranger to the wilderness, he knew these mountains intimately. But this was different. This wasn't about navigating a new trail or observing wildlife. This was about confrontation. The trek to the old quarry was longer and more arduous than he initially anticipated. The path, once a rough logging road, had long since been overgrown, swallowed by years of untamed growth. He pushed through dense thickets of rhododendron, ducked under low-hanging branches, and carefully navigated slippery rock faces. The sounds of the machinery grew steadily louder, drawing him like a magnet, each metallic shriek and deep rumble fueling his indignation. He heard voices too, indistinct at first, then clearer, shouting commands over the din. As he got closer, the forest began to thin, giving way to a more open, scarred landscape. Trees were fewer, their roots exposed by erosion, and the ground beneath his feet shifted from soft earth to loose scree and gravel. Finally, he broke through the last line of trees and stopped dead, his breath catching in his throat. The scene before him was shocking. The old quarry, once a moss-covered bowl of ancient rock, was alive with activity. A massive excavator, its metallic arm like a monstrous limb, was gnawing at the rock face, tearing away chunks of granite with a terrifying roar. Dump trucks, their huge tires churning up dust, waited nearby, ready to haul away the debris. Several men in hard hats moved around, shouting instructions, their voices sharp and unyielding. It looked like a full-blown mining operation, a blatant, audacious invasion. And then, he saw her. Standing imperiously near a makeshift trailer, a clipboard clutched in her hand, was Deborah Albright. She was wearing a different floral dress, but her expression was the same one he'd seen hours earlier, a mix of self-importance and barely contained rage. She was directing the men, pointing towards the quarry face, clearly in charge. His blood ran cold. This wasn't just trespassing, this was a deliberate, malicious act, a brazen escalation. She hadn't just called the cops, she had launched an invasion. The humiliation of the morning's encounter had clearly driven her to an extreme, reckless act. Alex stepped out from the cover of the trees, his voice cutting through the noise. "What in the world is going on here?" The roar of the excavator temporarily masked his words, but one of the workers, a burly man with a thick beard, spotted him. He nudged another man, and soon all eyes were on Alex. The excavator's engine sputtered, then died, plunging the quarry into an unsettling silence, broken only by the drip of water from exposed rock and the sudden, uncomfortable quiet that followed the roar. Deborah whipped around, her eyes widening in surprise, then narrowing into a furious glare. "You!" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the quarry walls. "How dare you trespass on private property? This is a construction site. You have no business being here." Alex felt a wave of icy fury. He slowly walked towards her, his gaze unwavering. "Private property, Ms. Albright? This is my private property. What do you think you are doing on my land with all this equipment?" He swept his arm across the scene, encompassing the excavator, the trucks, and the scarred earth. Deborah recovered quickly, a sneer twisting her lips. "Your land? Oh, please, Mr. Peterson. After this morning's charade, you truly believe that? This parcel was acquired by the Pine Ridge Estates HOA. It's part of our expanded community assets. We're extracting aggregate for our new roads and pathways. You were simply too stubborn to recognize the inevitable expansion." "Acquired?" Alex's voice was dangerously low. "Without a shred of legal documentation, without my knowledge, without any notice? This is blatant theft, Deborah. And trespass. You're destroying my land." He took another step closer, his presence radiating an intensity that made some of the workers subtly shift their weight. "It's a temporary inconvenience for the greater good, Mr. Peterson," she snapped, regaining some of her earlier bravado. "And frankly, your land is nothing but undeveloped wilderness. We're putting it to good use. You'll be compensated, of course, after we've established our full claim. Consider it a compulsory acquisition for the betterment of the community." The brazenness of her statement, her calm assertion of a right she clearly didn't possess, left Alex momentarily speechless. Compulsory acquisition? On his land? This wasn't just a misunderstanding about property lines, this was a deliberate, hostile takeover. He looked at the gaping maw of the quarry, at the fresh scars on the earth, and then back at Deborah, her face a mask of resolute arrogance. This was beyond an HOA dispute. This was an act of economic warfare, perpetrated by a woman who would stop at nothing to get her way, even if it meant destroying the very wilderness he cherished. The air crackled with unspoken threats, and Alex knew, with a chilling certainty, that this confrontation was only just beginning. The weeks leading up to this audacious quarry operation had been a strange mix of calm and unsettling anticipation for Alex. After the police incident, a quiet had settled over the mountain, a peace that felt almost too perfect, too fragile. Deborah had disappeared from Oakhaven, no longer seen bustling through the hardware store or holding court at the coffee shop. The HOA letters had stopped coming. Alex had begun to hope that perhaps, just perhaps, his clear demonstration of ownership, combined with the officer's polite but firm dismissal of her claims, had finally convinced her to back down. He allowed himself to believe that the mountain, his sanctuary, would once again be left in peace. He was wrong. Instead of direct confrontation, Deborah had shifted her tactics. She had launched a subtle, insidious campaign of misinformation and quiet maneuvering. Alex heard whispers in Oakhaven. Mrs. Gable, whose roof he had fixed, mentioned overhearing at the diner that the Pine Ridge Estates HOA was planning exciting new community expansions that would benefit everyone, hinting at new trails and recreational areas further up the mountain. David, the owner of the Rusty Spoon, told Alex that a man in a business suit, claiming to be from the HOA's legal department, had been asking questions about property lines and mineral rights in the area, particularly focusing on the old quarry. Alex had shrugged it off then, confident in his ironclad deeds, but now, a cold dread crept into his heart. He remembered a particularly unnerving encounter with one of Deborah's subordinates, a young woman named Brenda, who worked as an administrative assistant for the HOA. Alex had visited the small, temporary HOA office located at the entrance to the Pine Ridge Estates development, hoping to clear up a lingering question about a mailed flyer advertising a community cleanup day on what was clearly his land. Brenda, a nervous woman who seemed perpetually on edge around Deborah, had visibly paled when Alex brought up his property. She'd stammered, avoided eye contact, and insisted she knew nothing beyond what was on the official HOA map. But her eyes, wide with unspoken fear, told a different story. They conveyed a silent warning, a hint that something far grander and more sinister than mere property line disputes was afoot. Alex had dismissed it as Brenda's general timidity, but now he realized it might have been a subtle plea for help, a desperate attempt to warn him without directly defying her formidable boss. Alex, ever the man of quiet routine, had spent those weeks engaging in his usual activities, trying to maintain his inner calm. He would wake with the sun, meditate on his porch as the mist rose from the valley, and then dedicate several hours to his remote software work. In the afternoons, he would tend to his garden, hike his trails, or simply sit by the stream, observing the tireless dance of nature. He found solace in these simple rhythms, drawing strength from the timeless beauty of the mountain. He knew his land held secrets, old logging trails, a hidden waterfall he discovered one spring, and of course, the disused quarry, a scar on the landscape, slowly healing over time. He'd never thought about the quarry's potential. It was just a place where rocks used to be taken out, long ago. His understanding of property law, while not expert, was thorough enough to know that mineral rights often went hand in hand with land ownership. If he owned the land, he owned what was beneath it. He had specifically checked this during his initial purchase, confirming that Mr. Henderson had conveyed all surface and subsurface rights to him. This made Deborah's audacious move even more perplexing. How could she possibly justify this? One sunny afternoon, a few days before the quarry began operating, Alex had been walking one of his less frequented trails, deep in thought. He noticed a fresh, distinct tire track, clearly from a heavy vehicle, where no such track should be. It wound its way off his usual paths, veering towards the general direction of the old quarry. He also noticed several new, bright orange ribbons tied to trees, marking a crude trail. They seemed out of place, an ugly splash of artificial color against the natural greens and browns of the forest. He'd pulled them down, annoyed by the blatant disregard for his property, but hadn't thought much of it, assuming it was some misguided hikers or perhaps surveyors from another distant development. He never connected it to Deborah until this moment. The ribbons, the tire tracks, the whispers in town, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The shock of seeing Deborah herself at the quarry, directing the machinery, was profound. It wasn't just a miscommunication, or an overzealous HOA board. This was a deliberate, calculated act of aggression. She was not merely extending boundaries, she was claiming his mineral resources, a valuable commodity, under the guise of community expansion. This moved beyond simple HOA rules into the realm of large-scale property theft and environmental destruction. The scene in the quarry was stark. The exposed rock face, glistening with newly revealed mineral deposits, the roaring machines, the men in hard hats who looked more like roughnecks than community volunteers. One of them, a tall, powerfully built man with cold eyes and a perpetually grim expression, stepped forward. He seemed to be Deborah's head of operations. "Look, pal," the man said, his voice gravelly, "you need to back off. This is a private operation. We've got permits." He gestured vaguely towards a pile of equipment. "Permits for what?" Alex demanded, his voice ringing with indignation. "To trespass on my land and illegally mine my resources? This is private property. Get your machines off my land. Now." Deborah stepped forward, her face set in a hard, defiant line. "Mr. Peterson, I warned you this would happen. You were given every opportunity to cooperate. Your stubbornness has forced our hand. This operation is fully authorized by the Pine Ridge Estates HOA. We have the legal backing to proceed." She held up a clipboard, as if its mere presence was proof of her authority. "Legal backing?" Alex scoffed, his patience wearing thin. "What legal backing? A backroom deal with a corrupt county official? I have deeds. I have surveys. I have a century of history on this land. You have nothing but a flimsy HOA charter that doesn't even apply here. Oh, but it does, Deborah retorted, a glint of malicious triumph in her eyes. You see, Mr. Peterson, after your little show with the police this morning, we realized something. Your old deeds, while impressive, don't account for certain public domain designations. The county has reclassified certain unused parcels, including this quarry, as being available for public works projects. And as the Pine Ridge Estates HOA, we are initiating a public works project to improve community infrastructure. Therefore, this land now falls under a different jurisdiction. Alex felt a cold chill run down his spine. Reclassified? Public domain? This sounded like a legal loophole, twisted and manipulated to suit her agenda. He knew the county government in these rural areas could sometimes be slow, or perhaps, susceptible to influence from large developers. The idea that she had secretly maneuvered to have his land reclassified without his knowledge, circumventing his private ownership, was a truly shocking, underhanded move. It showed a level of cunning and ruthlessness he hadn't fully attributed to her before. This was not just about a porch railing, this was about power, control, and a blatant disregard for individual rights. Before Alex could respond, the large foreman stepped directly in front of Deborah, his gaze hard. Look, buddy. We're working. You can stand there and flap your gums all day, but we're not stopping. If you interfere, you'll be interfering with a legitimate operation. And that, he added, his voice low and menacing, could lead to a lot more trouble than a little HOA dispute. Alex stood his ground, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. He looked from the foreman's threatening posture to Deborah's defiant smirk, and then to the gaping wound in the earth, the excavator still waiting, ready to resume its destructive work. He was outnumbered, outmachined, and seemingly outmaneuvered, at least for the moment. But he would not yield. This was his mountain, his home, and he would fight for it. He took a deep breath, collecting his thoughts, and knew he needed to approach this with more than just anger. He needed to understand the full extent of Deborah's treachery, to expose her lies, and to protect his land. He had to find out exactly what she meant by public domain designations and reclassified parcels. The peace of his mountain was shattered, replaced by the ominous quiet of a pending storm, and Alex knew he had to be ready to weather it, and fight back with everything he had. His fight for his home had truly just begun. The roar of the excavator resumed, a guttural sound that vibrated through the very ground Alex stood on. The foreman, apparently satisfied he'd made his point, turned back to his crew, shouting orders over the din. Deborah, her face once again a mask of cold resolve, watched Alex for a moment longer before turning her attention back to the clipboard, acting as if he were nothing more than a nuisance. Alex knew he couldn't fight a giant machine with his bare hands, nor could he win a legal argument with a determined Karen and her hired muscle in the middle of a quarry. He needed information, and he needed it fast. He turned and began to retrace his steps, the sounds of the quarry echoing behind him, a constant, irritating reminder of the violation. His mind raced. Public domain designations, she had said. Reclassified parcels. This was a sophisticated move, far beyond simply sending angry letters. This implied a deeper conspiracy, a manipulation of local governance. How could his privately owned land, clearly documented for decades, be suddenly reclassified without his knowledge or consent? It felt impossible, a blatant disregard for property rights that should be sacred. Yet, the roaring excavator proved it was happening. As he hiked back towards his cabin, the familiar paths seemed different, tainted by the knowledge of what was happening just a few miles away. He felt a deep, almost physical pain for the mountain, for the scarred earth, for the piece that was being ripped apart. His earlier resolve to stand his ground against Deborah's petty HOA rules had now transformed into a fierce determination to protect his home, his wilderness, from this audacious act of theft and destruction. This wasn't just about property, it was about his sanctuary, his way of life, and the very integrity of the natural world he cherished. Back at the cabin, the quiet felt almost deafening after the din of the quarry. He poured himself a glass of water, his hands still trembling slightly from a mixture of anger and adrenaline. He needed to think clearly, methodically. He pulled out his old, worn laptop, its screen a familiar comfort, and connected to his satellite internet. His first step was to confirm his understanding of property law. He spent hours researching, delving into state statutes regarding eminent domain, land reclassification, and public works projects in rural areas. The more he read, the more convoluted the legal landscape seemed. There were indeed provisions for land to be acquired for public use, but they usually involved extensive notice, fair compensation, and a clear demonstration of public necessity. None of that had happened here. His next move was to check the county records online. The county clerk's website was notoriously outdated and difficult to navigate, but Alex, with his software background, was patient and persistent. He searched for any recent filings, any public notices, anything that pertained to his specific land parcel or the Pine Ridge Mountain area. He found nothing. No reclassification, no public domain designations, no new permits issued for mining in that specific quarry location. This either meant Deborah was lying, or she had managed to pull off something so secretive, so underhanded, that it hadn't even been publicly recorded yet. The latter thought sent a fresh wave of alarm through him. He knew his best course of action was to visit the county seat, to speak with someone in person. Online records could be incomplete or delayed. He needed to see the physical documents, to speak to the people who managed them. This would mean leaving the mountain, a rare and usually unwelcome necessity, but this was too important to ignore. Before he left, he decided to make a call, a difficult one. He dialed the number for Officer Miller at the Oakhaven Sheriff's Department. The officer answered, his voice sounding tired. "Officer Miller, this is Alex Peterson, from the mountain," Alex began, his voice calm, suppressing the urgency he felt. "Oh, Mr. Peterson. Everything all right up there after MS?" Albright's little outburst? Officer Miller asked, a hint of amusement in his tone. "Not exactly, officer," Alex said. "She's taken her expansion a bit further than a porch railing. She's got an excavator and dump trucks operating at the old quarry on my property. Mining rock, by the looks of it." A beat of silence. "Mining? On your land? Mr. Peterson, that sounds like a serious trespass. Did you say your land?" Officer Miller's voice had lost its amusement, replaced by genuine concern. "Yes, my land. Thousands of acres, as we discussed this morning. She's claiming the county reclassified it for a public works project, that it's now public domain. I can't find anything to back that up in the online records, and I certainly wasn't notified." "Reclassified?" Officer Miller repeated slowly, skepticism evident in his voice. "That's unusual. Very unusual. Especially without notice. Mr. Peterson, if she's operating heavy machinery and extracting materials without proper permits and without your consent on private land, that's a whole different ballgame than an HOA squabble. That's a criminal matter. Did you ask her to stop?" "I did," Alex confirmed. "She refused. Her foreman threatened me." "Understood," Officer Miller said, his tone grim. "We'll send a patrol up there. It might take a while, that road isn't easy. But if they're doing what you say, we'll shut it down. Get some photos if you can, Mr. Peterson. It'll help our case." "I will," Alex promised. "Thank you, officer." After hanging up, Alex felt a flicker of hope. The police were on his side, at least in theory. But he knew how slow bureaucracy could be, and Deborah clearly had connections. He grabbed his camera and headed back to the quarry, this time moving more cautiously, silently, like a phantom through his own woods. He needed undeniable proof. He managed to get within sight of the quarry, hiding behind a thick stand of pines. The excavator was still tearing at the rock, the trucks still hauling. He zoomed in with his camera, taking multiple photos and videos, wide shots of the entire operation, close-ups of the machinery, even a few blurry shots of Deborah directing the workers. He felt a pang of sadness as he documented the destruction. This was a place where he used to find rare ferns and observe nesting birds. Now it was a wasteland of dust and noise. He even managed to get a shot of a makeshift sign tacked to a tree near the quarry entrance, crudely painted with Pine Ridge Estates HOA, Community Project Area, Authorized Access Only. It was a bold face, a desperate attempt to legitimize an illegitimate act. With his evidence gathered, Alex drove down the mountain to Oakhaven, the scent of pine still clinging to his clothes, but now mixed with the metallic tang of diesel and rock dust. He briefly stopped at David's diner, ordered a coffee, and subtly tried to gauge the town's mood. David seemed a little more distant, a little less jovial than usual. "Heard anything about that new HOA expansion, David?" Alex asked casually, stirring his coffee. David lowered his voice, leaning in slightly. "You know, Alex, folks are saying a lot of things. Some of the new folks from Pine Ridge Estates are real excited about cheaper aggregate for their roads. Heard a rumor Deborah Albright pulled some strings at the county office, something about bypassing red tape for community development projects." He looked around nervously. "Don't quote me on it, just talk." Strings at the county office, Alex mused, confirming his suspicions. This wasn't just Deborah's private vendetta, she had corrupted the system. He thanked David and left, the knot in his stomach tightening. The county seat was a 2-hour drive, a journey Alex rarely made. The county building was old and imposing, its halls smelling of dust and old paper. He navigated his way to the recorder's office, a quiet space filled with towering shelves of ledgers and filing cabinets. He explained his situation to the clerk, a kindly but weary woman named Susan. She listened patiently, her eyes widening slightly when he mentioned Deborah Albright and the Pine Ridge Estates HOA. "The Pine Ridge Estates HOA has been very active lately," Susan said, her voice carefully neutral. "Lots of inquiries about land use. A lot of push for new developments. But reclassifying private land to public domain without due process, that's almost unheard of, Mr. Peterson. Not here anyway." She pulled out large, bound plat books and historical records, cross-referencing Alex's deeds. She meticulously searched through recent filings, property transfers, and public works declarations. Alex watched, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. Each ledger she flipped, each document she pulled, offered no confirmation of Deborah's claims. His land remained, according to all official, publicly accessible records, his own, private property. "Mr. Peterson," Susan finally said, pushing a thick binder across the counter, "I have searched every relevant record, both digital and physical, up to this very morning. There is absolutely no record of your land, or any part of it, being reclassified as public domain. No eminent domain proceedings, no public works acquisition, nothing. Your deeds are perfectly valid and stand as the sole legal claim to this property." She looked at him with an expression of genuine concern. "If they are operating on your land without your consent, they are trespassing, plain and simple. And mining without a permit is a very serious offense." A wave of relief, mixed with a renewed surge of anger, washed over Alex. His ownership was confirmed. Deborah had lied. But if she had lied, what was her real game? What was her true leverage? He thanked Susan profusely, a plan already forming in his mind. He had solid legal ground. He had police support, even if it might be slow. Now, he needed to make his case undeniable. As he walked out of the county building, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows. He pulled out his phone, noticing a few missed calls from Officer Miller. He returned the call immediately. "Mr. Peterson, good news," Officer Miller said, his voice sounding relieved. "We sent a patrol up there. Confirmed your report. There was indeed an active quarrying operation. We've issued a cease and desist order, and we're launching an investigation into illegal mining activities. The site's been shut down for now." The crew was pretty unhappy, but they packed up their equipment. Alex felt a surge of triumph. "Thank you, officer. That's excellent news. I've just been to the county recorder's office myself. There's no record whatsoever of my land being reclassified. It's still fully private property, under my ownership." "That corroborates our findings, Mr. Peterson," Officer Miller replied. "Sounds like Ms. Albright was operating on some creative interpretations of the law. We'll be reaching out to her and the HOA for further clarification. This isn't just about trespass anymore, it's getting into serious fraud if she's making false claims about land ownership to justify illegal operations." The news was a huge victory, a momentary calm after the storm. The quarry was shut down. But Alex knew Deborah wouldn't give up easily. She had shown a willingness to lie, to manipulate, and to act with brazen disregard for the law. This wasn't over. He had won this skirmish, but the war for his mountain was far from concluded. As he drove back towards the mountains, a new thought, cold and unsettling, began to form in his mind. Deborah had been humiliated, stopped dead in her tracks. What would a woman like her, so driven by pride and a need for control, do next when faced with such a public and definitive defeat? The answer, he knew, would likely be extreme. He wondered if she would dare to come back herself, perhaps armed with a new, desperate tactic, something far more personal and damaging than a simple police complaint or a mining operation. As he approached the winding road to his cabin, he noticed a faint wisp of smoke, thin and almost imperceptible, rising from the direction of his property, a place where no smoke should be. His heart leaped into his throat. The faint wisp of smoke, almost lost against the backdrop of the deepening twilight, sent a cold spike of fear through Alex. It was too small to be a campfire, too focused to be a lingering trace from a distant blaze. It was coming from the direction of his cabin. His mind screamed, a chilling realization forming. Deborah. She had been humiliated, defeated. This was her desperate, extreme retaliation. His earlier sense of relief from the phone call with Officer Miller vanished, replaced by a surge of pure, raw dread. He pressed down harder on the accelerator, the old truck rumbling and swaying on the winding gravel road, pushing its limits. Every turn, every climb of the mountain road felt agonizingly slow. The scent of pine in the air, usually so comforting, now seemed laced with something acrid, something burnt. As he rounded the final bend that brought his cabin into view, his heart lurched into his throat. The wisp of smoke had intensified. A plume, dark and thick, now rose from the back of his cabin, near where his firewood shed stood. A frantic image of Deborah, her face contorted with rage, flashed through his mind. She would stop at nothing. He slammed the truck into park, not bothering to engage the handbrake, and sprinted towards the cabin. The crackle of flames, small but growing, became audible over the pounding of his own blood in his ears. It wasn't the main cabin yet, but the firewood shed, the very structure Deborah had complained about so bitterly, was engulfed in a furious orange glow. Flames licked up the wooden walls, sending sparks dancing into the evening air. The heat hit him like a physical blow. He quickly assessed the situation. The shed was well ablaze, but the main cabin, though close, hadn't caught fire yet thanks to the slight distance and the prevailing wind. His immediate thought was water. He grabbed the garden hose, which he always kept coiled near the porch, and fumbled with the spigot. Cold water burst forth, and he directed the stream at the base of the shed, trying to douse the most intense flames. It was a losing battle. the shed was too far gone. His focus shifted to prevention. He sprayed the ground between the shed and the cabin, creating a wet barrier, and then drenched the nearest side of his cabin, hoping to prevent the embers from igniting its wooden walls. He worked frantically, his muscles straining, his lungs burning from the smoke. The flames roared, a hungry beast devouring the dry wood. The heat was immense, forcing him to shield his face. He cursed Deborah under his breath, a cold, bitter anger replacing the initial fear. This was pure malice, a deliberate act of destruction aimed at his home, his sanctuary. He felt a deep sense of violation, a personal attack that went far beyond property disputes. After what felt like an eternity, the fire in the shed began to die down, mostly because there was nothing left to burn. The structure was a charred skeleton, smoking and smoldering. The cabin, thankfully, remained untouched, its wet walls glistening in the dim light. Exhausted, Alex slumped to the ground, coughing, the acrid taste of smoke in his mouth. He looked at the ruin of his shed, the place where he kept his precious winter supply of firewood, the wood he'd meticulously chopped and stacked. It was all gone. He knew he had to call the police again. His phone, which he'd instinctively grabbed earlier, was still in his pocket. He dialed Officer Miller, his voice hoarse from the smoke and emotion. "Officer Miller," he rasped, "it's Alex Peterson." She came back. She set fire to my shed. A moment of stunned silence on the other end. "Mr. Peterson, are you serious? Is anyone hurt? Is the main cabin okay?" Officer Miller's voice was sharp with immediate concern. "No, I'm fine. The cabin's fine. But the shed's a total loss. She burned it to the ground. It was definitely arson. I saw smoke from down the road, sped up here, and found it fully ablaze. All right, Mr. Peterson. Stay calm. Do not touch anything. We're dispatching the fire department and a patrol car immediately. An arson investigator will be on their way. This is a very serious charge. Did you see her? Do you have any direct evidence?" Alex hesitated. He hadn't seen Deborah physically light the fire. He had only seen the smoke, then the blaze. But the timing, her threats, her prior actions, it all pointed directly to her. "I didn't see her physically do it, officer, but the timing, her threats this morning, her actions at the quarry. It's her. I know it's her." "We understand your suspicions, Mr. Peterson," Officer Miller said, his voice empathetic. "But we'll need evidence. Just secure the area, and we'll be there as fast as we can." As he waited for the authorities, the initial shock began to subside, replaced by a cold, calculating anger. He walked around the burned shed, inspecting the damage, looking for any clue. The smell of ash and burnt wood filled the air. He noticed something small, glinting in the dying light near the charred remains. He knelt down, careful not to disturb the scene too much. It was a single, silver earring, intricately designed, resembling a tiny, stylized floral pattern. He recognized it instantly. He had seen Deborah wear it before, often. It was a distinct, expensive piece of jewelry. He carefully picked it up, wrapping it in a clean handkerchief. This was his proof. The fire truck arrived first, its sirens muted as it carefully navigated the winding, dark road. Firefighters quickly sprayed down the smoldering remains, ensuring no embers could reignite. Then, Officer Miller's patrol car pulled up, followed by another vehicle carrying a uniformed arson investigator. The air filled with the quiet murmur of professional voices, the crunch of boots on gravel, and the distant hoot of an owl. Alex recounted the day's events, from the early morning HOA confrontation to the quarry incident, and finally, to the discovery of the fire. He handed Officer Miller the earring, explaining where he found it and why he believed it belonged to Deborah. The officer's eyes widened as he examined the small piece of jewelry. "This is strong evidence, Mr. Peterson," Officer Miller said, his voice grave. "Combined with her history of harassment and the previous incident today, this builds a very compelling case. We'll send this to the lab for fingerprinting, but it certainly looks promising." He then turned to the arson investigator, who was already meticulously documenting the scene, taking photos, and collecting samples. The process was long and thorough. The investigators worked late into the night, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, illuminating the charred remains of Alex's shed. Alex felt a strange mix of exhaustion and grim satisfaction. This wasn't just a petty dispute anymore. This was a criminal act, with clear intent and, hopefully, clear evidence. Deborah had crossed a line, a very dangerous line. As the officers finished up, Officer Miller approached Alex again. "Mr. Peterson, given the escalating nature of Ms. Albright's actions, we highly recommend you consider getting a restraining order. And for your safety, perhaps consider staying with family or friends for a few days, at least until we have her in custody. This woman is clearly unstable." Alex looked at his cabin, silhouetted against the starlit sky, his home. "No, officer," he said, his voice firm. "This is my home. I won't be driven out. But I'll take precautions. And thank you, for everything." He knew he couldn't leave. This was his mountain, and he would defend it. The next morning dawned with a quiet, almost eerie stillness. The air smelled faintly of smoke, a stark reminder of the previous night's terror. Alex walked through his property, his heart heavy, assessing the damage, and planning how he would rebuild. He thought about the peace he had sought here, the tranquility he had found. It had been violently disrupted. But something else was stirring within him, a fierce resolve, a deeper connection to this land that went beyond ownership papers and property lines. This was his home, and he would protect it. He spent the day clearing debris, the manual labor a welcome distraction. As he worked, his mind drifted to the long-standing legal battle he was now embroiled in. Deborah had clearly believed she could steamroll him, using her connections and her perceived authority. She had underestimated his resolve, and perhaps, more importantly, she had underestimated the deep historical roots of his ownership. He thought about Mr. Henderson, and his ancestors, who had painstakingly acquired this land over generations. They had built this cabin, lived off this land, and passed down a legacy of stewardship. Deborah's flimsy, newly minted HOA claim seemed pitiful in comparison to that deep, enduring connection. As he hauled away charred wood, he suddenly remembered something Mr. Henderson had told him during the initial sale, something he had dismissed as a charming anecdote at the time. Mr. Henderson, with a twinkle in his eye, had mentioned an old story, a local legend almost, about his family's land and its true historical significance. He had talked about how the mountain, particularly the land where Alex's cabin stood and the quarry was located, held not just natural beauty, but a pivotal historical secret. Alex had brushed it off as quaint folklore, but now, with Deborah's desperate moves and his confirmed deep ownership, the memory resurfaced, gaining a strange, new importance. He paused, leaning on his shovel, the implications slowly dawning on him. Could there be more to his property than even he, or Deborah, knew? A secret that could truly turn the tables, not just on the HOA, but on the entire power structure trying to encroach upon his mountain? He suddenly felt a surge of renewed hope, a thrilling sense of possibility. He had to delve into this secret, and he knew just where to start looking. The faint glimmer of an old memory, a local legend shared by Mr. Henderson, now shone like a beacon through the haze of smoke and anger. Alex put down his shovel, the ash-covered wood no longer his focus. He walked into his cabin, his mind racing, pulling out the old, leather-bound folder that contained his deeds. Mr. Henderson had talked about a hidden vault, a secret place on the mountain, tied to his ancestors and a forgotten piece of history. He had dismissed it as a charming bit of folklore during the sale, but now, a strange sense of urgency compelled him. What if it wasn't just a story? What if it was the ultimate answer to Deborah's relentless aggression? He found a faded, hand-drawn map tucked deep within the folder, almost hidden amongst the official county surveys. It wasn't a surveyor's map, it was an artistic rendering, sketched on brittle, yellowed paper, depicting landmarks around the quarry. A twisted oak, a peculiar rock formation, and a symbol that looked like a stylized key. Beneath it, in spidery, old-fashioned script, were a few cryptic lines, where the mountain breathes its secrets, and the old blood rests its claim. Beyond the stone heart, lies the truth unseen, a legacy against the greed's wild flame. The stone heart had to be the quarry. Alex grabbed his strongest flashlight, a compass, and a small trowel. He had to go back to the quarry, not to confront Deborah, but to uncover a truth far older and more powerful than any HOA bylaw. The sun was setting, casting long, purple shadows across the peaks, lending an almost mystical atmosphere to his quest. He hiked back, moving with a newfound purpose. The sight of the burned shed still smelled of ash, a raw wound. But his focus was now entirely on the quarry, on finding the landmarks from the ancient map. The excavator stood silent, a dark, hulking silhouette against the twilight sky. The ground was scarred, a fresh testament to Deborah's reckless greed. He found the twisted oak first, its gnarled branches reaching towards the heavens like ancient arms. Then, searching meticulously, he located the peculiar rock formation, a natural arch that seemed to defy gravity. Both were clearly marked on the map. The map indicated a path leading from the rock formation, veering away from the main quarry pit, towards a less disturbed area. He followed it, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The path was barely discernible, long reclaimed by moss and fallen leaves. He pushed through thick brush, guided by the compass and the faint lines on the old map. After about 20 minutes, the path led him to a sheer rock face, almost hidden by an overhang of dense pines. He shone his light along the rock, looking for anything unusual. And then he saw it. A faint, almost invisible seam in the rock, subtly different from the surrounding granite. It looked like a cleverly concealed door, blending seamlessly with the natural stone. He pressed against it, but it was solid. He scanned the map again, looking for the key symbol. The symbol on the map had been abstract, but looking at the rock face, he realized it depicted a specific natural indentation in the stone, shaped almost like a keyhole, just to the left of the seam. He ran his hand over the spot, feeling for anything out of place. His fingers brushed against something cold, metallic, and firmly embedded in a small crevice. He worked it loose with his trowel. It was an old, heavy iron key, rusted but remarkably intact. It had been placed there, long ago, for someone to find. His heart pounded. This was real. This wasn't just a legend. He slid the key into the keyhole indentation. There was a soft click, and with a low, grinding groan, a section of the rock face slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to slide inward, revealing a dark, narrow opening. Alex took a deep breath and stepped inside, his flashlight beam piercing the absolute blackness. The air inside was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and age. The tunnel sloped gently downward, leading into the heart of the mountain. After a few steps, it opened into a small chamber. Alex swung his flashlight around, illuminating the space. This was not a natural cave. The walls were cut stone, meticulously crafted, leading to a heavy, wooden door, reinforced with iron bands. It was a vault. He approached the door, noticing an inscription carved above it. Henderson, Keepers of the Peak. Below that, a date, 1888. Mr. Henderson's family had been here for a long, long time. He pushed the door. It was heavy, but yielded with a groan of ancient hinges. Inside, the vault was surprisingly spacious, filled with orderly stacks of old documents, leather-bound books, and a single, sturdy wooden chest. Dust motes danced in the beam of his flashlight. He opened the chest first. It contained a treasure trove of historical artifacts. Antique mining equipment, faded photographs of rugged-looking men, old maps, and a beautifully preserved original patent deed, framed and gleaming with importance. The deed, dated 1888, clearly stated a massive land grant to the Henderson family for their discovery and development of strategic mineral resources. And the mineral resources it specifically mentioned were rare earth elements, crucial for modern electronics and green technologies, elements that were now incredibly valuable. His gaze swept over the detailed, old maps. They showed not just the quarry he knew, but a much larger, interconnected network of rich deposits stretching deep within the mountain, far beyond what Deborah's brief, destructive operation had touched. This quarry, the one Deborah was mining, was just the very tip of an enormous, incredibly valuable iceberg. The implication hit him with full force. Deborah wasn't just after rock for roads, she was after these hidden, incredibly valuable minerals. She must have had an inkling, perhaps through old geological surveys, but she clearly hadn't known the full extent of it, or the true ownership. Then, he found it. Tucked within a ledger detailing family transactions and mining ventures, was a series of meticulously documented legal injunctions and permanent easements, dating back to the early 20th century. These documents, signed by governors and federal officials, established this specific Henderson property, including the quarry and the surrounding mineral-rich areas, as a protected private reserve for strategic national resources. Any attempt to mine or develop these resources without explicit federal approval, and without the direct consent of the Henderson family descendants, now Alex, was strictly forbidden and constituted a federal offense with severe penalties. It also explicitly stated that the land could never be reclassified as public domain or acquired through eminent domain by any local or state entity without direct federal intervention for national security, which had never happened. The paperwork was ironclad, unassailable, and superseded any local county reclassification. Deborah's entire scheme was not just illegal on a local level, it was a violation of federal law. Alex felt a surge of exhilaration mixed with a profound sense of responsibility. This wasn't just about his cabin anymore. This was about a national treasure, a legacy, and the audacity of a woman who thought she could claim it through deceit. He carefully photographed every document, every detail, ensuring he had irrefutable digital proof. He even found old, sepia-toned photographs of a younger Mr. Henderson standing proudly in front of this very vault, alongside men in mining gear, holding what looked like samples of the rare earth minerals. He left the vault, securing the ancient key back in its hiding place, and the stone door sliding silently shut. He had what he needed. Back at his cabin, the first streaks of dawn painted the sky with hues of orange and pink. He immediately called Officer Miller, his voice now imbued with a quiet but powerful conviction. "Officer, I have something that will blow this whole case wide open," Alex stated, his voice steady. "I've found historical deeds and federal documents that prove my property, including that quarry, is not only privately owned, but designated as a federal strategic mineral reserve. Any attempt to mine it, or to reclassify the land, without federal approval is a federal offense. These documents predate anything Deborah Albright could possibly claim." Officer Miller listened intently, a stunned silence on the other end. "Federal Reserve? Mr. Peterson, if what you're saying is true, this changes everything. That's way above our pay grade. We'll need to involve federal authorities. Can you bring these documents down to the station immediately?" "I'm on my way," Alex confirmed. By late morning, Alex was sitting in a conference room at the sheriff's department, not just with Officer Miller, but with stern-faced agents from the FBI and the Bureau of Land Management, BLM, who had arrived with surprising speed. He laid out the historical deeds, the federal injunctions, the maps of the rare earth deposits, and the photographs from the vault. He explained the connection to the Henderson family and the historical significance. The agents examined the documents with growing awe. The original patent deed alone was a historical artifact, but the Federal Reserve designations and injunctions were undeniable. One BLM agent, a woman named Agent Davis, her face initially skeptical, slowly nodded her head as she cross-referenced the documents with a secure database on her laptop. "Mr. Peterson," Agent Davis finally said, her voice filled with respect, "these documents are legitimate. This land, your land, is indeed part of a federally designated strategic mineral reserve. The specific rare earth elements mentioned here are critical for national security and technology. Any unauthorized mining or attempt to seize this land is a federal felony. Your title to this land is not just clear, it's virtually untouchable by local or state entities, unless the federal government itself initiates a very specific, and highly unlikely, acquisition." She looked at him with newfound appreciation. "You own a very important piece of the United States, sir." Officer Miller sat back, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. "So, Ms. Albright's community project just became a federal crime." "Precisely," Agent Davis confirmed. "And considering the scale of the operation she initiated, and the potential value of these resources, this isn't just simple trespass. This is potentially organized criminal activity attempting to exploit federally protected resources. We're going to be launching a full investigation. This HOA Karen," she added, a hint of steel in her voice, "is about to meet the full force of federal law." The rest of the day was a blur of interviews, official statements, and legal procedures. Warrants were issued. By late afternoon, news spread like wildfire through Oakhaven. Local residents, who had only heard whispers about Alex's reclusive nature and Deborah's aggressive HOA tactics, watched in astonishment as FBI agents swarmed the Pine Ridge Estates HOA office. Deborah Albright, her face pale and her usual defiant glare replaced by a look of utter terror, was seen being escorted out in handcuffs, her designer sundress looking particularly out of place. Her foreman and several other key figures in her quarry operation were also arrested. The illegal mining equipment at the quarry was seized, and the site was immediately put under federal protection. The news hit the local media, then state, and quickly national. HOA Karen calls the cops on my cabin, guess who owns the entire mountain, became the sensation it truly was, but the headline now had a new, explosive meaning. The entire mountain was not just privately owned, but contained a federally protected strategic mineral reserve, and the HOA's attempted land grab was a massive federal crime. The next day, Alex returned to his cabin, the mountain air feeling cleaner, lighter than it had in weeks. The burned shed was still a painful sight, but it was being investigated by federal agents, and he knew justice would come. The excavator was gone from the quarry, replaced by federal warning signs and surveillance cameras. The silence of the mountain had returned, but it was a deeper, more profound silence, no longer fragile. He sat on his porch, gazing out at the vast expanse of trees, the peaks rising majestically against the clear blue sky. His private sanctuary, his refuge, was not just safe, but had been revealed to be a place of immense historical and national importance. He, Alex Peterson, the quiet man who simply wanted to live in peace, had become the unlikely guardian of a secret woven into the very fabric of the mountain, a legacy stretching back generations, a silent testament to ownership that would forever put an end to any HOA's territorial ambitions. His mountain, truly, was his. And now, the entire nation knew it.